My name is Cassidy Merritt, and I'm 33 years old. 8 days ago, I walked out of a lawyer's conference room, sat in my car in the parking garage, and laughed until tears streamed down my face and fogged up the windows. An attorney sat on the other side of that table watching it happen, and I genuinely think he considered calling someone. My family had gone dark on me for 2 full years. No phone calls, no texts. Not even one of those generic holiday messages people send when they feel obligated. 2 years of total silence, and then one Tuesday afternoon, a letter arrived in my mailbox with a law firm's return address printed in crisp navy ink. It was one single page asking me to sign away my claim to the only property that ever made me feel at home in this world, my grandfather's cabin on Sycamore Lake. That document was supposed to be the final move in a very old game. Sign here, walk away, be the good girl you've always been. But what my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my grandfather had made a different game entirely, and he'd been playing it in my corner for 7 years without telling a soul. Before I take you into that conference room, I want to say something. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like the invisible one in your family, the one who gets the hand-me-down explanation while someone else gets the gift, I need you to stay with me through this whole story. Because it ends somewhere I never expected. Somewhere that has nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with finally feeling real. If this is your kind of story, please subscribe and drop a like. I read through every single comment, and I genuinely love knowing where people are watching from, so tell me your city and what time it is when you're hitting play. Now let me take you back to where this started. I grew up in a small town in eastern Kentucky, the kind of place where church directories double as phone books and everyone's business is everyone's business whether you want it to be or not. My dad, Warren Merritt, ran the county's largest insurance agency. Solid reputation, pressed khakis, and the kind of confident handshake that made people trust him before he'd said 10 words. My mother, Gloria, taught Sunday school and organized fundraisers for the elementary school library. On the surface, we looked like exactly the kind of family whose Christmas card you'd tape to your refrigerator. And then there was my older brother, Garrett. Garrett was 3 years ahead of me, and from the time I was old enough to understand the dynamics of our house, I understood that the equation was not equal. Garrett got the car at 16. I got a bus schedule and a suggestion to start saving. Garrett's college application got 3 evenings of my dad sitting at the kitchen table helping him craft his essays. I was handed a library book on writing your college application and told it was important to figure things out on your own. Garrett's bedroom had the window seat and the good closet. Mine shared a wall with the utility room, and I learned to fall asleep under the hum of the water heater. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I really need you to understand that. I'm telling you because context is everything in a story like this. My father had a line he used whenever I brought up any inequality. He'd set down whatever he was holding, look at me with patient eyes, and say, "Garrett just needs a little more help right now, Cass. You're the capable one. I've always known you'd be fine." I believed that for longer than I should have. I wore capable like a crown. I worked evenings at the local grocery store through high school. I bought my own school supplies from the time I was 14. I drove myself to college orientation in a 10-year-old Honda I'd paid for with 3 summers of weekend shifts. I was the first person on either side of my family to graduate with an accounting degree. 4 years, 20 hours a week at the university's financial aid office, student loans with only my own signature on them, a 3.8 GPA built 1 5 a.m. study session at a time. My parents said they'd be there for graduation. My mother had already picked her outfit. My dad asked what time the ceremony started and whether there was assigned seating or general admission. I reserved 4 chairs, 1 for each of them, 1 for my brother, 1 for my grandfather, Harold Merritt, who was the one person in my family who never once made me feel like I had to earn the right to exist. Graduation morning, my phone rang at 7:15. My dad's voice was casual, almost apologetic. "Hey, honey, Garrett's moving into his new place today, and there was a mix-up with the truck reservation. We've got to be there to help him unload. You understand?" I was standing in front of a mirror in my dorm room holding the blazer I'd ironed 3 times. I could hear my mother calling something to my dad in the background, something about a mattress, and did anyone bring the furniture pads. "It's just a ceremony," my dad said. "You've already done the hard part." I walked across that stage in front of 2,000 strangers. I sat next to a girl whose entire extended family had flown in from Colorado, and I smiled at her parents cheering when she shook the dean's hand. After the ceremony, I propped my phone against a stone bench in the courtyard and used the timer to take a photo of myself in my cap and gown. Alone, smiling at nothing. 2 hours later, my grandfather called. His voice had that particular roughness it always got when he was working to keep his emotions manageable. "I am so proud of you, Cassidy," he said. "Don't you worry about the rest of it. I already made sure of something." I assumed he was talking about a gift. A check tucked inside a card. A savings bond. I thanked him and thought nothing more of it. It would be 7 years before I understood exactly what Harold Merritt had made sure of. I met Owen Park when I was 27. He was a contractor, owner of a small residential construction company he'd built from scratch with a second-hand truck and tools he'd bought one by one over 5 years. I fell for him on our second date when he spent 40 minutes fixing the wobbly leg on our restaurant table because it was bothering him, and he'd brought a multi-tool in his jacket pocket because, he said, "You never know." He was patient and direct, and he smelled like sawdust and coffee, and he laughed at his own jokes without waiting to see if anyone else would. We got married when I was 29. Courthouse ceremony on a Thursday afternoon, dinner at the Italian place on Main Street with 8 people who loved us. My grandfather had passed away 2 years before, and his absence sat in my chest like a splinter I couldn't get to. My parents attended the wedding. At a family dinner the following week, my dad looked at Owen across a dish of green bean casserole and said, with the perfectly level tone of a man dropping a weight, "I thought you'd end up with someone more established, Cass. A contractor, I just thought you'd go further." My mother looked at her plate. My brother checked his phone. Owen's jaw went tight, but he stayed quiet. On the drive home, he looked at the road ahead and said, "Your dad doesn't have to respect what I do, but he needs to respect you. Those are 2 different things." I almost went no contact that night. I should have. But my grandfather had only been gone a couple of years, and something soft in me kept thinking he'd have wanted me to keep the door open. So I held on a little longer. The breaking point came at Thanksgiving. My parents had 18 people in that house. Cousins, aunts, uncles, the kind of family gathering where every seat is full and the noise level makes conversation optional. Garrett pulled me into the kitchen before dessert. He needed money, $6,000. He'd asked before twice, and both times had called it a loan. Both times had never mentioned repayment again. This time it was for a food truck he was planning to launch. I said no. I said it calmly and clearly, and I stood by the refrigerator with my arms crossed, and I said I wasn't in a position to do that right now. Garrett walked back into the dining room, and within 4 minutes my father was on his feet. What kind of family member turns her back on her own brother? He didn't lower his voice. 14 people heard it. My Aunt Connie froze with a dinner roll halfway to her mouth. My cousin Becca looked at me like she was watching something go off the rails in slow motion. "You've changed," my dad said, "and I don't recognize what you've changed into." My mother leaned toward Aunt Karen with the barely there whisper of a woman who wants to be heard but needs plausible deniability. "I wonder if it's Owen's influence. I really think she needs to talk to a professional, a therapist, someone who can help her sort through whatever is happening with her." The table absorbed it. 14 people, not one pushed back. I put on my coat. I kissed my cousin Becca's daughter on the top of her head. Owen was already at the door with his keys, and his expression had gone completely still, the way it does when he's decided something. We walked out, and I did not go back. The quiet that followed was strange. I expected relief. I got relief, eventually. But first I got the noise that fills a silence, the second-hand version of events that my parents were circulating without me. Within 3 weeks, my mother had spoken to half the extended family. The story was clean and portable. Cassidy is struggling. She's become hostile, possibly due to her husband's controlling nature. We're worried about her mental health. We've reached out, but she won't respond. My cousin Becca called me in February. "Your mom told people you've been seeing a psychiatrist," she said. "She said something about an episode at Thanksgiving." There had been no episode. There had been no psychiatrist. My mother had invented a clinical-sounding narrative and handed it to people who trusted her because she had a Sunday school attendance record and a good lasagna recipe. It got darker. My dad called my former professor, a woman I'd worked closely with through my senior thesis, to check in on me under the guise of concern. In a small community, a call like that is not care. It's sabotage in a button-down collar. Becca told me later that my father had started describing me to relatives as possibly a danger to herself. Those were his exact words. He reached for mental health language as a weapon because his daughter had declined to write a check and declined to sit silently while her mother speculated about her mental stability in front of the entire extended family. Phone calls from relatives dried up over the following months. Birthday texts stopped. The circle contracted around my parents and Garrett like something being cinched shut, and I was on the outside of it. Owen and I moved 30 minutes east, close enough that it didn't feel like flight, far enough that I wouldn't run into my father buying lumber at the hardware store. I got promoted to senior accountant at a firm that didn't know my last name and didn't ask about my family. Owen's company grew steadily. He hired 2 more crew members. We bought a yellow house with a screened-in porch and a deep kitchen where morning light pooled on the countertops and made everything look like a painting. It was a good life. I knew that. But every year around the holidays, I'd sit with my phone in my hands and scroll through old contacts the way you check a wound to see if it's healed. It never quite had. No one called. Owen would sit next to me on the porch steps in the evenings without saying anything, just being a solid presence in the space where words weren't enough. "Do you think I should have done something differently?" I asked him once. He thought about it for a real moment, the way he approaches anything structural. "You'll know what to do when the time comes," he said. "And if it never does, that's a complete answer too." I drove past my grandfather's cabin once, on a Sunday afternoon when I was taking the long way back from a client meeting. The place on Sycamore Lake Road with the green shutters and the stone chimney, and the dock that always needed one more board replaced. The pine tree at the edge of the property that Harold had hung a swing from the summer I was 8. I slowed the car. I didn't stop. It hurt in a way I didn't have vocabulary for. Everything about that place was him. The smell of pine sap and wood smoke. The way the screen door took 2 pulls to close all the way. The fact that he always had a root beer float waiting for me when I arrived, because he said it was the one food that made any occasion feel like a celebration. I kept driving. I kept moving. Slowly, unevenly, I kept building. Then, 26 months after that Thanksgiving, an envelope appeared in my mailbox on a Wednesday afternoon. Law firm return address. My full name typed out exactly, no nickname, which meant someone had deliberately looked it up. It sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days. If you've ever been estranged from family and suddenly received something with a law firm's letterhead, you understand the weight of that envelope. You understand the way your stomach finds its feet right before it drops. If you've been there, hit that like button. You're the reason I'm telling this story. I opened it on a Saturday morning when Owen was out on a job site. The coffee was fresh. The house was completely still. The letter was from an attorney named Mr. Reardon, a firm based in my parents' town, and it stated in clean, professional language that Warren Merritt was initiating the sale of a residential property located at 22 Sycamore Lake Road, my grandfather's cabin, and that as a potential heir of the estate of Harold Merritt, I was being asked to sign a quitclaim deed relinquishing any interest in the property. 30-day deadline. Signature line at the bottom. Phone number for Reardon's office. I read it 3 times. 2 years of silence so complete it had its own texture. No birthday acknowledgement, no check-in, no accidental forwarded email. And the first contact from my family in all that time came through a law office asking me to give up the last thing my grandfather's hands had ever touched. I set the letter on the table and looked at the bookshelf across the room, at the small carved wooden loon my grandfather had made one winter and given to me for no reason except that he'd made it and thought of me. He'd said, "I made this watching the lake. The lake made me think of you, so this is yours now." That was Harold. Every gift had a reason, and the reason was always that he'd thought of you. On the shelf beside the loon sat a sealed envelope I'd kept for 7 years. I'd found it when I was sorting through his belongings after the funeral, tucked inside the toolbox he'd always kept on his workbench. Brown paper, taped shut, his handwriting on the front in the deliberate block letters he used when he wanted something to be clear. For Cassidy, when you need it. I'd never opened it. I thought it was a letter about grief, something sentimental and heartbreaking that I wasn't ready to feel. I'd put it on the shelf next to the loon, and I'd looked at it for 7 years. That Saturday night, I opened it. My hands were steady enough until I actually broke the seal. Inside were 2 items. The first was a legal document, multiple pages, notarized, with a county clerk's filing stamp on the cover page. The heading read, Irrevocable Trust Agreement, Harold B. Merritt Family Trust. Below it, the language explained that the property at 22 Sycamore Lake Road had been placed into an irrevocable trust. The named trustee was a man called Mr. Fielding, Harold's longtime personal attorney, as it turned out. The sole named beneficiary was listed on page 4. Cassidy Ann Merritt. The second item was a piece of notebook paper, folded into thirds, in my grandfather's particular handwriting. The kind that tilted slightly to the right when he was being careful and intentional. Cassidy, I know how your father sees things. He loves you, but he doesn't always see you. The cabin is yours. It always has been. I made sure nobody could take that from you, and nobody can. Don't let them convince you otherwise. All my love, Grandpa Harold. I sat on the floor of my bedroom with my back against the bed frame, and I cried in a way I hadn't in years. Not the kind of crying that comes from pain alone, the kind that comes when something broken gets confirmed and healed at the exact same time. He had known. Years before that Thanksgiving, years before the silence and the phone calls to relatives and the fabricated narratives about my mental health, Harold Merritt had looked at his family, looked at the pattern, and decided quietly and deliberately that his granddaughter would not be left exposed to it. He hadn't left me the cabin to hurt anyone. He'd left it to me because he believed I was worth protecting. That was all. That was everything. Owen came home that night to find me sitting in the middle of the bedroom floor surrounded by papers. He didn't ask what had happened. He sat down next to me on the hardwood, put his hand on my shoulder, and stayed there. After a while, I started explaining. He listened. He didn't fill the silences. He just stayed. Next morning, I called Mr. Fielding. He picked up on the second ring, and when I told him who I was, his voice warmed immediately. I've been expecting your call for a while now, he said. The trust is completely valid. It was executed properly and filed with the county 7 years ago. Your father's name appears nowhere in the documentation as a beneficiary or as a grantor. The cabin passed to the trust during your grandfather's lifetime and was never included in the probate estate. I called Reardon's office that afternoon. The receptionist had the practiced tone of someone who'd already filed me in the expected column. Are you calling to arrange return of the signed document, Ms. Merritt? I'd like to schedule a meeting, I said. I have questions before I can consider signing. A pause, keyboard sounds. Mr. Reardon has availability on Thursday at 11. I'll take it. I called Fielding back and asked him to prepare certified copies of everything. The trust agreement, the original filing, the county recording page, the beneficiary schedule, the full instrument. I'll have everything ready by Wednesday, he said. Then, carefully, do you want me at the meeting, Ms. Merritt? Not in the room, I said, but I'd like you reachable by phone. Understood completely. I spent the 4 days between that call and Thursday doing what I do. I'm an accountant. I prepare. I organize the documents by date, cross-reference the trust filing against the county recorder's online database, verified the instrument against the probate records from Harold's estate, and confirmed what Fielding had told me. The cabin had entered the trust before Harold's death. It never touched the estate. My father had either never checked or had assumed that next of kin meant automatic inheritance without any legal verification. He'd operated on presumption, the way men who have always been right about everything tend to do. He'd never hired anyone to look into it. He declared it his and never questioned the declaration. Wednesday night, Owen asked if he should come along. I shook my head. This is mine to finish. He kissed my temple and handed me a travel mug of coffee for the drive. It was stainless steel with a small dent in the side from when I dropped it in a parking lot 2 years ago, and it was, inexplicably, one of my favorite objects in the world. The night before the meeting, Becca called. "I need to tell you some things," she said, with the careful voice of someone navigating around something fragile. "Your dad's been calling people, not just family, everyone. He's in serious financial trouble. Garrett's restaurant, did you know he pivoted from the food truck to a full restaurant?" I hadn't known. "It opened 8 months ago. Your dad co-signed the business loan, all of it. And about 6 months ago, he refinanced the mortgage on their house, his and your mom's house, and pulled out equity to keep the restaurant operating." She paused. "The restaurant isn't making it, Cass. The loans are coming due, and your dad is personally on the hook for somewhere around $200,000. I sat on the porch steps and let the night settle around me. The street was quiet. Owen was inside doing dishes. "He found a buyer for the cabin," Becca continued. "Offer came in at $340,000, enough to cover his guarantee and give Garrett's restaurant another few months of runway. And the only thing standing between your dad and that sale is your signature. He's been telling people you'll sign. He told Uncle Dennis that you had no use for the place anyway, that you'd never been close with Harold." I stared at the maple tree at the edge of our yard until the shape of it blurred. "Thank you," I said, genuinely. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to the meeting." Thursday morning. Gray skis, the kind that in April in Kentucky mean the weather is considering all its options. I put Grandpa Harold's carved wooden loon on the passenger seat because I wanted something of his with me. I put the folder of certified documents in my bag. Then I drove the familiar 30 minutes back to a town I'd left behind, and my hands remembered every turn before the road signs confirmed them. Past the pharmacy where Harold used to buy me peppermint candies in the little tins because he said peppermint solved most problems that didn't require a hammer. Past the park where I'd sat on a bench next to him every Friday afternoon in 5th grade while he read his newspaper, and I did my homework, and neither of us felt the need to fill the time with talk. Past the intersection where his truck used to idle, engine low, radio on, waiting for me with the window down and one hand tapping the door in time with whatever song was playing. The town had not changed the way I had. Same storefronts, same water tower with the town seal painted on the side, same cluster of dogwoods outside the library that bloomed pink every April without being asked. I stopped at the red light on Merchant Street and looked at the folder on the seat next to the loon. I thought about the last time I'd asked my dad about Harold's estate. It had been at the reception after the funeral, 3 days after the burial. I was 26, red-eyed, holding a plate of food I couldn't taste. "Did Grandpa leave a will?" I'd asked. My dad had glanced at me briefly over the shoulder of the person he was talking to. He didn't have much in the way of formal arrangements. "The property comes to me as direct next of kin. It's standard." He'd said it the way he said things he considered settled. The tone of a man who stopped double-checking his conclusions sometime in his 40s and never went back to the habit. The light turned green. I wasn't going back to relitigate old arguments. I was going back to complete what Harold had started. Reardon's office was on the 3rd floor of a building above a florist shop, and the elevator was the kind that takes long enough that you start composing your thoughts. The waiting area had a small table with a water pitcher that had already been put to work, judging by the rings on the coaster. The receptionist, a woman in her mid-50s with silver-framed glasses on a beaded chain, looked up when I gave my name. "Mr. Reardon will be with you shortly." The tone was practiced. Neutral, the tone of an office that had heard several versions of this particular story before I arrived. I sat in a chair next to a small rubber plant and opened my folder one final time. Trust agreement, certified copy. County recording page, stamped. Fielding's card with his direct number circled. Harold's letter, sealed in a plastic sleeve so the paper wouldn't take any more damage from being handled. Everything in order, everything accounted for. The clock read 10:58 when the door opened. "Ms. Merritt," Reardon was polished, early 60s, the kind of deliberate calm that comes from doing this job for 30 years. He held the door to the conference room and stepped aside. I walked through, and my father was sitting at the far end of the conference table. Warren Merritt, same posture, same pressed shirt, same way of sitting in a room like he'd already assessed it and decided it was adequate. He looked up when I walked in, and something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile but was wearing one for cover. "Cassidy," his voice was measured, soft. The voice he used at the insurance agency when he was explaining why a claim had been partially denied. Professionally gentle. "Come on in. Let's get this taken care of so we can all move on." I stopped 2 steps inside the doorway and looked at Reardon. "I was under the impression this was a meeting between your office and me." Reardon adjusted his collar. "Mr. Merritt asked to be present. I thought it might help move things along." "Help move things along," I repeated, the way you repeat a phrase when you're deciding where to file it. I sat down across from my father, set my bag on the chair beside me, placed the folder on the table without opening it. My dad leaned forward, clasped his hands together, and did something with his face that was supposed to read as warmth. "I know there's been distance between us, and I'm not here to get into all that. We can work that out separately. This is just about the cabin. Let's be practical." "You used Grandpa Harold's name," I said. He paused. "What?" "You said we can work that out separately. Before that you mentioned what Harold would have wanted. I just want to note that you've been in the same room with me for 30 seconds, and you've already invoked the one person in our family who never needed anything from me in order to engage with me." His face reorganized itself. He turned to Reardon in the small way that men do when they want a witness to confirm they're being reasonable. "She's always been like this, reads into everything." Reardon wrote something on his legal pad. "The cabin's been empty for years," my dad continued, steering back toward the practical. "No one's using it, it's deteriorating, and I have a buyer ready at 340. Your brother's business needs a bridge, and this resolves all of it cleanly. There's no reason for this to be complicated." Reardon slid the quitclaim deed across the table. I picked it up. Read every word. Let the room be quiet while I did it. My dad's finger began a soft rhythm on the tabletop, the same unconscious tap he'd always made when he was waiting for something he expected to receive. I set the document down. "You haven't asked how I am." He blinked. "I'm sorry. 2 years, and the first contact is through a law office with a signature deadline. You didn't call. You didn't write. I want to name that before we talk about anything else." He shifted. "We tried to reach you, Cassidy. You made yourself unreachable." "My phone number hasn't changed in 7 years." Reardon cleared his throat. My dad kept his eyes on me. "I'm not here to revisit the past. I'm here to handle a piece of property. That's all this is. And if I don't sign?" The tapping stopped. "Then everyone waits longer and it costs more money. Don't make this something it doesn't have to be." Don't make this something it doesn't have to be. The man who had told a church full of relatives that I was mentally unstable. The man who had skipped my college graduation for a furniture delivery. The man who had looked at my husband and said I'd aimed too low. Don't make this complicated. "Before we go further," I said, "I'd like to understand why this was the first contact after 2 years and not a phone call." His expression recalibrated. He turned slightly toward Reardon to make what he was about to say something the lawyer would hear and absorb. "We've been trying to reach her for 2 years. She cut contact with the entire family. No explanation. No willingness to engage." "No explanation," I repeated quietly. "Gloria and I have been heartbroken. We tried everything." He shook his head, performing a particular kind of sadness that has architecture to it. "Honestly, we've been worried about her well-being. Her husband's been..." He dropped his voice by one careful note, not a positive influence on her isolation from us. There it was, same playbook, same stage direction. The lawyer was now looking at me the way people look at someone when they've just been told that person requires looking at differently. I didn't correct him. I didn't defend Owen. I didn't pull out a list of receipts. I looked at my father and said, "Are you finished?" Something stalled behind his eyes. The prepared smile held itself in place, but stopped functioning as a smile. His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, held up a finger, and answered. He cupped his hand around the receiver, but conference rooms at that volume have no secrets. My brother's voice came through thin and tight. Did she sign? Dad, I need to know by the end of the week. The landlord served us a notice yesterday. I can't keep the doors open past Friday if we don't. I'm handling it, my dad said. Give me an hour. But Garrett was mid-sentence and already past the point of waiting. Just tell her it's for all of us. That always works with her. She always comes around when you remind her what family means. My dad ended the call. The back of his neck had gone deep red from the collar up. Reardon looked at his legal pad with absolute focus. I unfolded my hands. She always comes around, I said quietly, exact words. When you remind her what family means. My dad set the phone face down. He's under enormous stress. I'm not commenting on his stress. I'm noticing that what he described sounds like a script. I looked at Reardon, who was still looking at his notepad. That's the negotiation I was brought here for. Say the right things, invoke the right feelings, wait for the predictable outcome. And I had been predictable for 30 years. Strong one, capable one, the one who can handle it, the one who comes around when reminded what family means. I had been so reliably low maintenance that no one had ever thought to wonder what it was costing me to be that way. I reached for my folder. Before anything else gets signed or discussed, I said, I have documentation I'd like you both to look at. I opened the folder and slid the first page to the center of the table. The heading was unmistakable: Irrevocable Trust Agreement, Harold B. Merritt Family Trust. My dad's eyes went to it immediately. What is this? This is an irrevocable trust executed by Harold Merritt 7 years ago and filed with the county clerk. It conveys the property at 22 Sycamore Lake Road, the cabin, to the trust in full. The trustee is Mr. Fielding, who was Grandpa Harold's personal attorney. The sole beneficiary is listed on page 4. I pushed the full document forward. You're welcome to read all of it. The room held a very particular silence for approximately 4 seconds. The kind that has a before and an after. My dad didn't reach for the papers. He looked from the document to me and back, the way someone looks when they're trying to identify which of two things is wrong. Reardon, however, picked up the trust immediately. He read the first page, turned to the second, read to the bottom, turned to the 4th page and stopped. He took his reading glasses off, pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose, and set the document on the table with deliberate gentleness, the way you set down something that is definitely fragile. Then he looked at my father. I have sat in enough professional meetings, audits, reviews, depositions, negotiations, to recognize the precise expression of an attorney who has just realized that the foundation of the morning's proceedings does not exist in the form he was told it existed. Reardon didn't raise his voice or make an abrupt gesture. He simply looked at my father with the clinical stillness of a doctor reviewing imaging results that are worse than expected, and he waited. My dad, who had been leaning on the table with the posture of a man in control of the room, went completely still. Mr. Merritt, Reardon said, and the formality in those 2 words was entirely new. Were you aware that your father placed this property into a trust prior to his passing? My dad's mouth opened. Nothing arrived. He tried again. That can't be right. The cabin was part of his estate. I handled the estate. It came to me. Reardon turned to the filing date and read it aloud. Then he continued with the careful deliberateness of a man choosing each word for structural accuracy. According to this document, the property was transferred into the trust approximately 3 years before your father's death. If this filing is accurate, and it carries a county recording stamp, then the property would have been excluded from the estate entirely. It would not have passed through probate. That's impossible, my dad shook his head. I managed everything. The county recorder's office would have the original filing on record, Reardon continued. I would strongly recommend verifying, but this copy appears to have been properly executed and recorded. Under these circumstances, you would not have held title to the property. My dad turned to me. His face had lost its architecture. It was just a face now, nothing holding it in its professional shape. Where did you get this? From Grandpa Harold, I said. He sealed it in an envelope and put it where he knew I'd eventually find it. He would never, his voice cracked along the middle. He wouldn't do that to me. He wouldn't go around me like that without telling me. He didn't go around you, I said. He protected his granddaughter. Those aren't the same thing. The silence in that room had a weight to it. The wall clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a delivery truck backed up with a slow, patient beep. Reardon turned to me. Do you have contact information for the trustee? I slid Fielding's card across the table. Reardon dialed on the conference room speaker. 2 rings. Fielding answered with the unhurried steadiness of a man who had been waiting precisely for this moment for 7 years. After introductions, Reardon asked the direct question. Mr. Fielding, can you confirm the existence and validity of an irrevocable trust established by Harold Merritt for the property at 22 Sycamore Lake Road? I can confirm that completely, Fielding said. I drafted and executed the instrument myself. It was filed with the county 7 years ago. Harold Merritt funded the trust with the Sycamore Lake property during his lifetime. His granddaughter, Cassidy Merritt, is the sole named beneficiary. The property did not pass through Harold Merritt's probate estate, as it was not part of the estate at the time of his death. Is the trust currently in effect? Reardon asked. Active and unchallenged. I am the current trustee. Reardon thanked him and ended the call. He turned to my father with the quiet gravity of a man bearing news he did not want to deliver. Mr. Merritt, I need to pause this proceeding. The quitclaim deed I prepared is not applicable here. Ms. Merritt has no claim to waive because the property was never included in your father's estate. It was already held in trust for your daughter. My dad pushed back from the table. The chair scraped against the floor with a sound like an argument being dropped. You planned this. His voice had a new quality to it, not the controlled softness of a man managing a meeting, but the thin edge of a man whose plan has just ceased to exist. You've been holding this for 7 years, waiting for the right moment. I didn't plan anything, I said. I didn't open that envelope until your lawyer's letter showed up in my mailbox. You brought me to this room, Dad. The word landed between us with weight I hadn't expected. I hadn't called him that in 2 years, and something about hearing it changed the temperature of the room. This was your move. I just came with the truth. My dad pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. When he lowered them, something had shifted in his face that I hadn't been prepared for. He looked diminished, not defeated exactly, emptied. The way a building looks after the interior is gutted. Still standing, but no longer the same structure. Cassidy, his voice was barely holding together. If I can't complete this sale, your brother loses the restaurant. I co-signed everything. We refinanced the house. We could lose it. Our house, your mother's home. I heard him. I genuinely heard the fear in it. You put everything on the line for Garrett, I said. You refinanced your mortgage for his dream. You put your retirement and your home at risk for him. And in 2 full years, through all of that, through all the stress and the financing and the decisions, you never once called to ask how I was. His mouth opened. Not once. You reached me through a law office when you needed a signature. That's the entire summary of our relationship for the last 2 years. I kept my voice even. Not cold, just clear. And now you want me to give up the one thing Grandpa Harold left me so that you can solve a financial problem that was never mine to carry. He would want us to be a family. He would have wanted you to be a father to both of your children. Reardon stood, gathering his notepad with the posture of a man trying to exit carefully. I think it would be best to adjourn today. Mr. Merritt, I'd recommend consulting with a trust litigation attorney before taking any further action. Ms. Merritt, you're free to go. I stood. I collected every document and placed them back in the folder. The quitclaim deed sat in the center of the table, still blank on the signature line, still waiting for something that was never going to arrive. Cassidy, one word, just my name stripped of strategy. I stopped at the door and turned. He was still seated at the table, hands flat on the mahogany, looking at me with an expression I recognized from very far back. From the man who had taught me to bait a hook at Sycamore Lake when I was 5, who had carried me piggyback up the hill behind the cabin when I turned my ankle in a gopher hole and wouldn't stop apologizing for my clumsiness for the entire walk. That man existed. He'd just been buried under a very long accumulation of choices that pointed the other way. "You have my number," I said. "It hasn't changed." I walked out, down the hallway, past the receptionist, down the elevator with the smell of florists' flowers drifting up from the shop below, out the glass door into an April morning that couldn't decide between sunshine and clouds. I sat in my car with the engine off and my hands on the wheel for 7 minutes. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the specific exhaustion of a truth that has taken years to arrive. But the meeting wasn't the ending. My dad left Reardon's office and drove to Sycamore Lake. Becca called me that evening. "Your dad is at the cabin," she said. "Your mom and Garrett are with him. They've been there since about 2 o'clock. I was standing at the kitchen counter, still in the clothes I'd worn to the meeting. Owen was making dinner. I said, "They can't sell it. They can't transfer anything. The trust prohibits all of that." "I know, but your dad told your mom it's Harold's family property, and no piece of paper written by a lawyer changes what it actually is." I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling. Owen turned off the stove without being asked. Fielding answered on the first ring this time. I explained the situation in 3 sentences. He listened without interrupting. "They cannot legally do anything to that property," he said. "They cannot sell, lease, transfer, or encumber it. If they're occupying it without authorization, I'll send a formal demand to vacate. If they refuse, we proceed with a trespass filing." I closed my eyes. I don't want my father arrested at my grandfather's cabin. Let's hope he makes the sensible choice before it comes to that. I thanked him. Owen stood across the kitchen with his arms crossed, watching me with the expression he wears when he's already solved the structural problem and is waiting for me to ask him to explain it. "They'll leave," he said. "Your dad is a businessman. At some point the math is going to be louder than the pride, and then they'll leave." Saturday morning, Becca sent me a screenshot. Garrett had posted a photo to his social media. The cabin porch, my mother with a coffee mug, my dad with his arms crossed and his back to the lake. The caption, "Making memories where they were always made. Some things belong to the people who love them." I looked at the photo for a long time. In the corner of the frame, visible through the porch railing, was the wooden swing Harold had hung for me from the big pine tree the summer I was 8. He'd checked the knot 40 times before he let me sit in it. He'd pushed me on it every evening that whole summer until the fireflies came out. Garrett's hand was resting on the rope. Fielding had a certified letter in the mail by Saturday evening and sent an email copy for immediacy. The letter was formal, specific, and complete. "You are currently in unauthorized occupation of property held in irrevocable trust. You are hereby notified to vacate the premises within 72 hours. The alternative was named clearly. My dad was no longer dealing with his daughter's feelings. He was dealing with a county filing, a professional trustee, and a legal instrument that had no interest in family dynamics whatsoever. Garrett deleted the social media post that evening. The 72-hour clock began its quiet work. Monday morning, my phone rang at 6:52. Before sunrise, with the particular urgency of someone who believes that reaching out before the day officially starts might catch you in a softer state. It was my mother. I answered because the muscle that responds to your mother's number doesn't reason. It just responds. "Cassidy," her voice was raw. I couldn't tell if she'd been crying or if the rawness was functional. With my mother, performance and feeling had always lived in the same neighborhood. "I need you to hear me. Your father can't sleep. He hasn't slept in days. Garrett could lose everything, his restaurant, everything he's worked for. This is destroying us. Please." I sat on the edge of the bed. Owen was awake beside me, still, eyes open. "This didn't begin with a trust document," I said. "I know we made mistakes. You told people I was mentally ill, Mom. You said it at Thanksgiving in front of 14 people. You said it to relatives, to neighbors, to people who trusted your judgment. You invented a clinical situation and distributed it as fact because I said no to a loan." A long silence, the breathing kind. "You've changed," she said finally, quiet hard. "I hope so," I said. "I hope so." She hung up. No goodbye. She never said goodbye to conversations she'd lost the thread of. She'd exit abruptly and describe it later as the other person being impossible to reach. Owen put his hand over mine. They left Monday afternoon, 58 hours into the 72-hour window. Fielding told me later that Reardon had made one final call to my dad that morning. Vacate or face a formal trespass complaint in a matter where the documentation overwhelmingly favors the trust. The math finally got louder than the pride. My dad packed the car. My mother collected the items she'd brought from home. Garrett carried out 2 bags of groceries he'd apparently stocked the refrigerator with, which suggested he'd arrived with intentions more permanent than a weekend visit. They drove away from Sycamore like the same way they'd driven out of my life, without calling, without looking back, without once acknowledging that the property had never been theirs to occupy. I didn't go right away. I waited a full 10 days. When I finally drove up Sycamore Lake Road on a Thursday afternoon, the sky was the particular washed-out blue that happens after April rain. The gravel driveway crunched exactly the way I remembered. The pine tree was bigger than it was in my memory. The swing was still there. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the cabin smelled like it always had pine and cold stone, and something faintly sweet from the cedar panels Harold had put in the closets. The kitchen had been left clean. My mother had wiped down the counters before she left, the way she always cleaned spaces she was about to be removed from thoroughly, as though making them unimpeachable. On the kitchen table, there was a single house key on a plain ring, and next to it a torn piece of lined paper. My dad's handwriting, smaller than I remembered, more careful. This was never only about money. Dad. I folded the paper and put it in my coat pocket. I didn't know if it was true. I didn't know if he believed it. I didn't know if it mattered yet. I walked down to the lake. The dock needed 2 new boards, but it held my weight. Harold's old swing chair sat at the end of the dock facing the water, facing the tree line, facing the wide, ordinary stillness of a lake on a Thursday afternoon with no one on it and nowhere to be. I sat in it. A great blue heron crossed the cove low and unhurried, its shadow moving over the water before the bird itself cleared the frame. The lake was absolutely still except for that shadow. I sat in my grandfather's chair, and for the first time since any of this had started, I felt unambiguously located, like my coordinates had finally come in. The financial reckoning came for my father the way these things always arrive, gradually, and then suddenly. Without the sale, the money was gone. The buyer walked away. Garrett's restaurant held on for 2 more months before the doors closed for good. He sold the equipment and remaining inventory to a restaurant liquidator and took a management position at a chain location 2 towns over. My dad honored his personal guarantee by liquidating his truck, a 12-year-old pickup he'd driven to every job site since I was in high school, and pulling from his retirement account at a penalty. Together, it was enough to settle the debt, but not enough to undo the consequence. His planned retirement at 63 shifted to 68, maybe later. The refinanced mortgage was still wrapped around the Birchwood house like a standing obligation with no exit date. In a small town with no large secrets, the story moved through driveways and church parking lots and grocery store aisles. People started asking questions that Warren Merritt, a man who had always held rooms by being the most settled person in them, no longer had satisfying answers for. Why hadn't he known about the trust? Did Harold really make that decision deliberately? And that daughter, the one he described as unstable, she'd had the legal documentation the entire time. My dad stopped attending the civic committee meetings he'd co-chaired for a decade. He started using the side entrance at work and eating lunch at his desk. Becca relayed this to me not as gossip, but with the careful delivery of someone who thought I deserved the complete version of the story I'd been written out of. I listened. I didn't feel victorious. There is no satisfaction in watching your father diminish. There is only the truth and the particular quiet that settles around it once it's finally been said. Garrett's Facebook went quiet. My mother stopped hosting the women's fellowship events she'd organized at their church for 15 years. Becca explained this too, with her characteristic care. People keep asking about you, Cass. Is Cassidy all right? What happened with the cabin? Your mom doesn't have an answer that holds together anymore. The narrative she'd built, blameless mother, troubled daughter, concerned family, worried community, had developed structural problems. The trust documents were public record. The filing was dated. The facts were patient, and they had outlasted the fiction. I didn't feel triumphant about any of that. I genuinely didn't want my mother to lose face in a community she'd built her identity inside of for 40 years. I just wanted her to stop narrating my life for other people. I just wanted to stop being a character in a story I hadn't agreed to be part of. 3 weeks after the restaurant closed, my phone showed a text from a number I hadn't received a message from in over 2 years. Garrett, 3 sentences. I know we haven't spoken and I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say. But I want you to know I understand it wasn't fair. I'm sorry for my part in it. I read it sitting on the dock in the evening, watching the light leave the surface of the lake in the particular sequence it always does: gold, then copper, then flat gray, then the sudden blue of actual dusk. I didn't respond that night, but I didn't delete it either. A week later, Becca mentioned offhandedly that my dad had asked about me. He'd asked her, not asked her to pass it along, just asked if she knew whether I was doing all right. She mentioned it in the way she always shared things, not pushing me toward any particular response, just filling in the map. I let it sit. I thought about it on the dock, in the morning with coffee, in the car on the long drive back from client meetings. I thought about what Harold would make of all of it, whether he'd be satisfied with how things had unfolded, or whether he'd push me to do something I wasn't ready for. I suspected he'd sit next to me on the dock and watch the lake and wait for me to figure it out myself. That was always his way. The extended family came back in small, tentative movements. My Aunt Connie, the one who'd frozen with the dinner roll at that Thanksgiving table, called one afternoon from what sounded like her car in a parking lot. "I was there that night," she said. "I heard what your mom said, I saw what was happening, and I didn't say anything. I've been carrying that." Her voice had the weight of something long held. "I'm sorry, Cassidy." I thanked her. I meant it. I didn't pretend it erased anything, and she didn't ask me to. 2 cousins texted within the same week. One of them, Delia, wrote, "Something always felt off, but I couldn't name it. I'm glad you're okay." I understood that. I'd lived inside the thing for 30 years without being able to name it for most of them. How could anyone on the periphery be expected to see it clearly? Not everyone came around. My uncle on my dad's side maintained his version firmly. One cousin went quiet entirely, not hostile, just absent, the way people become when a story gets too complicated for the side they've already chosen. I didn't chase anyone. I didn't post a counter-narrative. I didn't circulate anything. I kept living my life in the incremental, concrete way that had always been my actual survival strategy. Owen and I started working on the cabin in May. It wasn't renovation so much as conversation, listening to what the structure needed and answering it. New planking on 2 sections of the dock. Screens replaced on the porch. The bathroom faucet that had dripped since I was 11 finally got a new cartridge. Owen handled the electrical, which was considerable. The panel hadn't been updated in 20 years, and there were circuits in the kitchen that had been running hot for at least a decade. He replaced everything with the focused satisfaction of a man who finds broken systems genuinely interesting to solve. "It's not dramatic," he said one evening, carrying a coil of wire in from the truck, "but it'll hold for another 50 years now." I found Harold's woodworking tools in the workshop he'd built in the back corner of the property, a small building with a north-facing window for even light, which I only understood was intentional the 3rd time I noticed it. The tools were on a pegboard he'd hung himself, each one outlined in pencil so it had a home to return to. Chisels in size order, hand planes oiled, files sorted by coarseness. On the workbench, an unfinished birdhouse, the kind with a circular entry hole and a slanted roof, sat exactly as he'd left it, like he'd stepped out for lunch and just never got back to it. In a bin beneath the bench, I found a folder of photographs. Me at age 7, standing on the dock with both hands wrapped around a fishing pole that was twice my height. Harold's hands just visible at the edges of the frame, ready to help if the fish pulled, which he'd later told me was always the plan. A photo of the 2 of us at the kitchen table doing a jigsaw puzzle, both of us leaning forward with identical focus. A photo from the summer I was 10. The summer I sat on the porch steps and watched him plane a board for what seemed like an hour, and finally asked why he was going so slowly. And he said slow is the only way to get it right. I held the photographs for a long time. He hadn't left me a piece of property. He'd left me a record of being seen. Not as the strong one, not as the capable one, not as the one who doesn't need anything. As Cassidy, his granddaughter, the one who noticed the way he planed the wood, the one who watched the heron cross the cove. The one worth protecting. I had the photographs framed and hung them on the kitchen wall, where the afternoon light comes in through the west window and makes everything in the room look warm. Every time I see them, I hear his voice on the phone the day I graduated. I already made sure of something. He did. He made sure of something extraordinary. A month after the meeting at Reardon's office, I sat at Harold's kitchen table, my kitchen table now, and I wrote a letter by hand. Not through Fielding, not through Becca, not through any intermediary, just me and a pen and 2 pieces of paper. To my parents, I wrote, "I'm not writing to win anything. I'm not writing to cause pain. I'm writing because I think we've gone long enough without honesty between us, and I think we might both need this said plainly. The cabin stays in the trust. That was Grandpa Harold's decision, and it reflects values he held about fairness that I intend to honor. Nothing will change that. As for the rest of it, if there is a version of a relationship between us that is still possible, it begins with something simpler than a legal meeting. It begins with you seeing me, not as the strong one, not as the capable one, not as the one who can always handle it, as your daughter. I exist as a full person with the same need to be seen that anyone has. My door is not closed, but I will not hold it open for people who only arrive when they need something from me. If you want to walk through it, you know how to find me." I addressed the envelope and walked it to the mailbox at the end of Sycamore Lake Road on a clear May morning with the birds going absolutely wild in the trees above me. I didn't wait by the phone after. I didn't construct a hopeful scenario. I said what I needed to say, and I put it in the hands of the Postal Service and whatever my parents chose to do with it. Owen had read the letter before I sealed it. He'd handed it back without a single suggested edit. "That's completely you," he said. "That's exactly you. I used to think that protecting yourself from family meant walls. Thick ones, permanent ones you build in anger and maintain in distance. I don't think that anymore. What I have now at Sycamore Lake, what Harold built for me in those documents and that single envelope, is not a wall. It's a door I control. On my terms, with my values, with my grandfather's quiet confidence that I was worth the care it took to build. Not everyone will understand that. Some people in my family still see the story differently. Some never will. I've made a kind of peace with that which doesn't require their agreement. It's a Friday evening as I finish telling you this. I'm on the dock. The swing chair Harold built is warm from an afternoon of sun. The lake has gone the color it goes when the light is leaving flat gold that deepens into something too beautiful to describe accurately. Owen is inside. I can hear the radio he leaves on when he's working, something slow and brass-heavy drifting out through the screen door. I have Harold's fishing rod in my hands, the old one with the cork grip and the reel that clicks on the cast. I've been out here for 2 hours and I haven't caught anything, and I am not troubled by this at all. I talk to him sometimes, not out loud, just the way you talk to people who left the room but never completely left the house. Grandpa Harold, I found the envelope. I found the trust. I found the letter you wrote me. And I sat in your chair at Reardon's conference table and I watched the truth do everything you built it to do. The water moves. The heron crosses the cove. Thank you. My name is Cassidy Merritt. I am 33 years old. 2 years ago, my family's lawyer sent me one document expecting a signature. What arrived with that document instead was the evidence that someone had already decided, years before I needed it, that I was worth protecting. He'd done it quietly and completely, and without asking for anything in return. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. If you stayed with me through all of this, I want you to know I'm genuinely grateful. This story isn't about revenge. It was never about that. It's about what happens when someone finally sees you clearly, even if that someone can't say it to your face while he's alive and has to say it through a notarized document filed with the county clerk. I have one question for you before you go. If you could leave a letter for your younger self, the version of you who felt most invisible, what would you want her to know? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, and if you want more stories like this one, there are a few in the description that I think will stay with you. Hit subscribe so you're there for the next one. I'll see you soon.